So hi everyone, as Andy said, I'm Jess Blackburn-Smith and I'm the Specialist Lead from the NHS Wales e-Library team. So this week is International Open Access Week, so welcome to this webinar where I'll be introducing open access and its importance. So today I'll be covering the following topics. I'll start with a definition of open access and provide some wider context around this publishing model. I'll then give some further information on what we mean by fully open access journals and hybrid journals, which you may have come across before. Next, I'll provide you with some more detail on the three most common open access publication routes, and these are known as gold, diamond, and green. Following this, I'll provide you with some of the benefits of publishing research open access, why it's so important to consider making your work accessible in this way. And finally, I'll briefly go over how to copyright your work and give an overview of some of the common licenses available. Okay, so what do we mean by open access? It's probably a term that you've come across quite a lot, but you might not have had too much to deal with it in your current roles. But essentially, it is a publishing model that makes research outputs available online at no cost to the reader. So this means no paywall for anyone at all. The open access movement has been growing in recent years and picked up speed with the formation of consortia and initiatives such as Coalition S, Budapest Open Access Initiative, and Spark Europe. And I'll include some links to these at the end for you to go away and have a look at these in more detail if you're interested. So various consortia and initiatives such as these have formed to push against traditional publishing models, where research outputs, some of which have been publicly funded, were then published behind paywalls and so would not be accessible without payment or institutional subscriptions, which could be quite high. A 2021 report of the Global State of Open Access highlights a significant increase in freely accessible scholarly output in recent years, reporting that this number has increased from approximately 27% in 2011 to over 49% in 2020. So these figures really demonstrate the effectiveness of the open access movement, and more subscription journals are flipping to open access, or at least becoming hybrid. So I'll just go through fully open access journals now and hybrid journals. So for fully open access journals, these do not have subscription fees and so are free to read online. However, there will be a charge for the author to publish their article within the journal, and this is known as an article processing charge, or an APC. This can be quite a high fee, upwards of £750 and into the thousands, depending on the publisher. The exception to this are diamond open access journals, where there is no fee for authors or readers, as these journals will be funded externally in some way, so whether that's via an organisation, an institution, or another initiative. And I'll go into more detail on the diamond open access route on the next slide. So hybrid journals are subscription-based journals, and these offer authors the option to pay an article processing charge, so that APC that we mentioned, to make individual articles open access. So this allows authors to publish in non-open access journals that have their individual article made open access. There is a risk with this, though, of double dipping, which is where an article is paid for twice, effectively. So this is when a library or institution pays to subscribe to a particular journal, but that journal also charges an APC to authors from that institution to make their articles open access, while not providing a proportionate decrease in subscription costs for the institution. So as a result, the library or wider institution is paying twice to access the article, once through the subscription and once through the payment of an APC. For more information on the costs of publishing, including some pretty shocking figures, I'd recommend watching the documentary Paywall, the Business of Scholarship. It's a few years old now, but the issues it highlights are still very much prevalent today, and I'll provide a link to that again as part of this presentation on the last slide. So there are a lot of journals out there, and it can be daunting to know where to start when thinking about where to publish your work. So for help choosing a journal, don't miss the webinar later this week on Thursday, where you can hear advice from an NHS Wales librarian, Lisa Whelan, and you will have the opportunity to ask him your questions. And I was about to say I'll pop it in the chat, but I can see that that's already been done, so thank you. So now I'm going to give some further information on the different open access models, focusing on 3 routes. So these are gold, diamond, and green. So I'll start with gold open access. So this is where the author publishes in a fully open access journal or a hybrid journal and pays that APC that we mentioned, which will be a one-off fee that allows the article to be published open access on the journal website so that there is no paywall for readers. So this publication fee may be covered by funding the author has received. It may be covered by their institution if there is a pot of money set aside for open access publishing. This can often be the case for universities in particular. Or it may be need to be covered by the author themselves if there's none of these funding options available. So although Gold Open Access is a great option for authors who have that funding available to them to cover that APC, which, as we mentioned, can be in the thousands, this is not always possible. But this shouldn't put you off making your work openly available to all. There are 2 other open access routes that can be utilised, which have no cost to the author, and these are diamond and green. So diamond open access is like gold open access without the article processing charges. So if a journal is diamond, there is no cost to the author to publish their article open access, and they can also have it available immediately on the journal website without an embargo. And there are more and more diamond publishers out there, some of which are university presses, like Cardiff University Press is diamond, and so is Edinburgh Diamond. They're both possible options out there. Where university presses are diamond publishers, the authors do not need to be affiliated with the university to publish with them. So you don't have to be a member of Cardiff University to publish in Cardiff University Press. To identify diamond open access journals, you can search the directory of open access journals. Clues in the name, I suppose, but where you can filter to journals with no publication fee to get that list of diamond journals, some of which might be relevant to where you want to publish your work. But say you've looked at this list, and what if the journal you want to publish in does not have a gold or diamond open access option? If this is the case, then you can think green. So green open access, also known sometimes as self-archiving. So this is where the author publishes their work in a subscription journal, but then deposits their accepted manuscript in an institutional or personal repository following any embargo periods that may be required by that publisher of that journal. So after the embargo period, the paper is then freely available through the repository, despite the version on the journal website remaining behind a paywall. So it will exist in 2 places at once, one of which will be free to read in the repository and one of which will be behind a paywall on the journal website. You can use the tool Sherpa Romeo to check whether you can deposit an accepted manuscript version of your article in a repository. You will need to do these checks first because it's not always possible. Sherpa Romeo provides clear summaries of publisher copyright and open access archiving policies. So this includes the copyright license that needs to be applied, which I'll go into a bit later on. And it will also state whether there are any embargo periods. And this does it on a journal by journal basis. So you can type in the journal name and it will show you the specific policies for that journal. So following these checks, if you are able to archive your work in a repository, options for personally deposit your research include repositories like ResearchGate. And then there are institutional repositories. So most universities will have one of these to house the scholarly outputs of those affiliated with them. And there are also a number of NHS organisations who have repositories for their members of staff. And I'll show you one of these examples now. So, hope technology is on my side. Put this across here. So I've just opened up the Christie NHS Foundation Trust repository. So this repository contains the research outputs of staff and students at the Christie NHS Foundation Trust and Cancer Research UK Manchester Institute. So I'll show you an example of an article in here that is open access via the green route. And before I go on, actually, I realise I haven't checked the chat, so I'm just going to do that quickly now. Sorry about that. So really interesting. I didn't realise non-university staff could potentially publish with the university press. So yeah, this is something that actually is quite new to myself as well. So I didn't look on every single university press out there that has a diamond publishing option, you know, for diamond journals. But the few that I was looking at, there were no stipulations on those. It might be a case-by-case basis, so it's best to check individual kind of policies for all of the diamond journals out there. But certainly for Cambridge, for Cardiff and for Edinburgh, both of those did not stipulate that the authors had to be from those universities, so that they're great options. Cool. So this here is an example of an article from the Green Route. So it was published in the Journal of Nature Reviews Clinical Oncology. You can see that from all the metadata that's available on this record, including where it was published and the DOI as well. So if I were to try and access this article from the journal website, I would be met with a paywall unless my institution had a subscription or I had a personal subscription, or if I was willing to pay as well, that would be a way that I could view it. But I would be met with a paywall. In this case, I am already logged in. So e-library users do actually have access to this. But if I didn't have my e-library login, then, and I was just a member of the public or anyone without a subscription to the journal through their institution, then I wouldn't be able to access this article without payment. So although the article is not free to read here on the journal website, the publisher permissions do allow for a copy of the accepted manuscript to be archived in a repository. So I'll just snip back to here, and I'll just show you what that looks like. So this is the version of the article in the Christie repository. So you can see that it's just a Word document here. So an accepted manuscript is the version of the article after peer review, but before the formatting has been applied to the publisher. So it is just a document containing the accepted content ready to be formatted nicely by the publisher for their journal site. So for the reader, the content is the same as it would be on the journal website. It's just that the format differs. If I scroll down, you can see the introduction here, which would be the same for the published article. So the format is different, but also the location as well. Obviously, this is in a repository where it's free to read rather than on the journal website where it would have a paywall. And making the accepted manuscript available in this way through a repository means that the content of the research output is free to read for anyone at no cost to the author. And I'm just going to quickly show you, I mentioned Sherpa Romeo as a tool that you can use to check the policy. So I'll just nip over to there and show you what the tool tells you for this particular journal, for this particular article. So this is Sherpa Romeo. It's a GIST product. It's free to use. And if I just type in Nature Reviews Clinical Oncology, it gives you the details of the publication, and then you can see the publisher policy here, and it tells you what versions are available to be popped in institutional repositories. So I can see here that the article would have had to have undergone a 6-month embargo. It's a 2014 article, so we're well past that 6 months, and that's why it's available. But it would have had an embargo period of 6 months from its publication date, but it is able to be popped in an institutional repository. So this is a really useful, straightforward tool to use to do those checks before you make any deposits. Now I'll just pop back to the presentation. Check the chat again. All good. Okay, so these were the main open access routes available, but why publish your work in this way? There are many benefits to making research outputs open access, some of which we've already started to touch upon in the presentation. So for one, research can be freely available to read by anyone across the world at no cost to the reader. The reach of the research findings is therefore widened, removing barriers to knowledge, to knowledge sharing with all members of the public who have access to the internet. The findings from research outputs are often picked up by the media and disseminated widely via national media channels, but when the original publications are not available open access, the audiences then have to just rely on secondhand information from the media, and they're not able to access that evidence for themselves. Removing paywalls for readers allows the research to be accessed by those outside of institutions as well. It increases the diversity of readership. The work may be read by policymakers and educators, just to name a couple, and regardless of whether the institution has a paid subscription. So the research findings could actually be put into practice. They're not sitting in silo. So your research can have a wider impact. For authors, publishing their work open access allows their work to be built upon by others, by other research and other people out there, and may lead to more collaborative opportunities, advancing the discipline or industry. By licensing the research, which I'll cover in the next slide, this allows the work to be built on by researchers all over the world, whilst ensuring that the original research, your research, is credited. Also, many research grants, especially those from public funds, mandate that the research outputs must be published open access. And also institutions that you are part of may have an open access policy that requires your research outputs to be published in this way. In order to comply with funder policies, if you've received funding, and your institution's open access policy, if they have one, it may be necessary to publish the research output openly. So it's best to check these policies. Okay, so that's a whistle-stop tour of open access. I know that was very quick, and I'm more than happy to take any questions. But I'm just going to now go on to copyright. So there are 6 Creative Commons licenses available, as well as an option to put no restrictions on the reuse of your work. And the license chooser tool is a really useful way to work out which license you would like to apply for your work. Some Creative Commons licenses that publishers usually offer are BY, BYNC, and BYNC-ND. So it's best to check the publisher policy, because it may be that they stipulate a certain license that you have to use, but these are common ones that you would find available to you. So with a BY license, the work can be distributed, remixed, adapted, and built upon in any medium or format, including commercial use, as long as the author is credited. With a BYNC license, this is the same as a BY license, however, only non-commercial use is permitted. And then the last one, a BYNC-ND license, allows the copy and distribution of the work in any medium or format in an unadapted form only. So no adaptation is allowed, and the author still needs to be credited. It's the case with all of the Creative Commons licenses that the author needs to be credited. So it's really good. Even if it's not essential that you credit your work, I'd say it's worth applying these to all your work that you kind of put out there as well. So when publishing your work open access in a journal, there may be restrictions on which license types are offered by the journal's publisher, and you can use the Sherpa Romeo tool that we went on to earlier to help search for information on publishers' open access policies, including the copyright licenses that can be used for each journal. Also, if you're receiving funding, the license that needs to be applied may be stipulated by the funder. It's not always the case, but it can be the case. So it's best to check the funder's policies on this. Okay, so just to quickly summarise what we've gone through today, we talked about open access and defined it as a publishing model that makes research outputs available online at no cost to the reader. And this may be achieved through the gold route by publishing in fully open access journals and hybrid journals, which requires an article processing charge to be paid by the author. Or there's the diamond route, if a suitable diamond journal can be found for your publication, which has no cost for the author. And then finally, if neither of these options are available to you, there's always the green route by archiving the work in an accessible repository. So there are many benefits to making research open access, which we covered, including breaking down barriers, ensuring knowledge is shared and not siloed, allowing a wider reach and impact, and may also be necessary to comply with funder policies and institutions' open access policies if applicable. And then we touched on Creative Commons licenses, which can be used to copyright your work and ensure attribution. But be aware you will need to check the publisher copyright policies, and the publisher may mandate which CC license can be applied to your work, as may your funder. So this has just been a very brief overview of open access, and there is a lot of work going on in this sphere, and it's only growing. So please do get in touch if you'd like any help finding out more. And before I finish, I've just got one more slide to remind you that there are 2 more sessions this week. So we mentioned the Thursday session at 10 o'clock on choosing where to publish, where you can find out what needs to be considered when choosing a journal to publish in. And also on Thursday, we have a webinar on citation searching and a demonstration of Scopus as well, which is a citation database that all of NHS Wales can access. And yeah, so if you have any queries about the sessions this week or the presentation today, please get in touch via the e-library email address, and I'll share the slides as well for anyone who would like a copy. And I'll include the reference list as well that has been used in the presentation and some useful links. So thank you for your time today, and I'll now open up the floor to questions. I'll check the chat first. Okay, so we have a question. What are the options for NHS staff for putting in repositories? So in terms of NHS in general, I've got a link. I think I've included the reference for this one. So when I share this out, it'll have all these links in. And there is, I've got too many on here now. Oh yes, so NHS England have a site which lists many institutional repositories that are available for staff in NHS England. For NHS Wales, I'm not aware of many, to be honest, if any. So I think it's something that, speaking personally, I think it's something that we could be working on. But obviously that would have to be a much wider conversation about how that could be done. It would be up to individual institutions at the moment to set up a repository if that's something that they are able to do. But if anyone is aware of any, please let me know, because it would be really good to know. Rachel?
Hi, yeah, I was just going to come in and say there are such things as subject repositories as well. So I haven't got any examples off the top of my head, but I know they exist. So if, for example, somebody was publishing in the field of oncology, there is usually some sort of oncology repository that you could deposit work in as well, as long as it was open access. I can do a bit more digging around that for you and provide some feedback. The other thing is that if somebody in the NHS is publishing and they're affiliated with the university, they can deposit in the university repository as an NHS members of staff as well, or if they're working with other organisations outside of that, so there's always somewhere they can deposit. The other option is Europe PMC, EPMC, which is the European version of like PubMed, for example. That's the subject repository that they could submit into as well.
Yeah, thanks, Rachel. No, I'm definitely happy to, we can look into that a bit further and circulate that information as well after this webinar with the slides. And then absolute kind of last resort would be kind of personal self-archiving. As long as you've checked the Sherpa Romeo tool and you are able to do that, then you could always deposit in a personal repository like ResearchGate to make it available that way. But obviously there are advantages to popping them in subject ones as well, so we'll definitely do some digging around that. Thank you. Any other questions? So there's a question, it's just come in. So preprint version of the article is accessible for all. If yes, then where can I look for it? Sorry, I've already covered it. So the accepted manuscripts, there's various kind of versions of them preprint. So it's whenever the content has definitely been approved for, the content's been approved for the journal, but it's not yet, it's not available. Sorry, I'm going to start that one again. So the accepted manuscript is going to be exactly the same content as a printed journal, but it will be just a basic document. and these will be the versions that are available in repositories. So the way you can check whether you're able to do that is via the Sherpa Romeo tool. So you would be looking for, if you're looking for those particular articles and you're met with a paywall, then the option would be that you could search in repositories. So they could be the subject repositories that Rachel mentioned. It could be ResearchGate, that you could see if a preprint accepted manuscript version is in there, or it could be the institutions repositories as well. So if there's an article that you're met with a paywall and you can see that the authors are part of particular institutions, you could check those institutions to see if they've got repositories and see if there are versions of that article that are available within those repositories. Sorry, I'm not sure if that answered your question. I'm more than happy to have another go at that one if it's not been answered. Yeah, so it's best to check the repositories of the authors and see if you're met with a paywall, you don't have a subscription and you don't want to pay for the article, then repositories are a really good place to look, and you can look at the institutional repositories of those authors. It's probably a good place to start.